This is Richard Fleming, aka Landguard, and this is just a quick video overview of how the story flow should play out in a game. Initially, the player will start in a village that is close to the forest portal area, and once they reach the central area of the village, coming down here to the locations of the town, once the player gets in sort of the center area of the village, this will trigger Grant to come in from this path, animated to be staggering, if possible, and collapsing, calling out for help. And this initiates the flow, encounter with a child part. And so if the player ignores Grant, which is entirely possible given the fluid conversation system, it's not like the game's going to stop the player and force them to deal with this, they should lose compassion or whatever virtue is being tracked for that. Because to ignore a fallen child, he's, teens. Obviously not a full-grown man yet. So to ignore a child gasping and crying out for help's pretty non-compassionate. The player, of course, has the complete option to totally ignore the situation, which will cause further compassion loss and loss of reputation with the village. And eventually, at some point, if the player delays long enough, the villagers will organize their own rescue, but quite a few of them will die, and this will leave the village more susceptible to bandit attacks. If, however, the player immediately goes over to talk to Grant, they will gain some small measure of compassion. And this is pretty much the only conversation trail I will follow to keep this short and tight, because I know you guys over there don't have a lot of time. The player talks with Grant, and the initial conversation, of course, always have the option of being a jerk about things. But the initial conversation, Grant is pretty disorganized. The player doesn't even learn his name at this point yet. He just manages to get out that something attacked him and his friend and took his cousins. You're not really sure what happens, but eventually he stops responding until Thistle, an elderly person, arrives that happens to know him. And that particular conversation starts up. And this is where the player will learn Grant's name, and that somebody named Taryn is hurt back at wherever this happened. And the conversation follows through here. Now, it's a little bit tricky because the player can interrupt this at any time with comments or questions, but roughly this is the flow. Thistle will turn to the player and ask you, did he say anything? You can either mention that he mentioned things or monsters or cousins. If it's about cousins, she immediately assumes bandits, but nope, that's not it. Grant interjects with, no, it was a thing, monsters. And that's when she's like, wait a minute, you took him to the portal. And that's not a good thing. We continue on here. And eventually get to the point where Thistle asks the player to help out. The player can refuse. That will get you a small loss with the village. But Thistle does thank you for at least coming over and speaking to him, realizing that it's the village's problem, not yours. So you don't really lose compassion at this point. Of course, if you immediately volunteer to go and help, you'll gain a small bit of valor because you just got told how dangerous this is. And you will also gain some respect within the village. At this point, you have the option of talking with the villagers, which will gain you some additional information about the portal, the legend that you don't cross the wooden bridge. It's never needed repairing, so something's going on with this. And at this point, the player can head towards the forest. Which, if we go and look at that, that is the scene that was designed. Collapse down that. So, player enters in from over here. You find Taryn fairly early on, and as far as non-quest specific things, the pool, of course, would be a good source of fish, and I envision that there would be some harvestable plants down here as well for the player to interact with. Coming up here, let's see, where are we? At first, you won't see anything. Then the shimmer of magic and Terran will appear. Of course, he is a apprentice to the local hunter, so he does have some minor magical abilities for concealment. If the player casts a heal spell on Terran, they should gain some small amount of compassion. Of course, it's completely possible to ignore the wounded child. Again, compassion loss. You're walking past a wounded child. That's not very virtuous behavior. Unless you can talk with Terran to find out more about the encounter, what attacked him, what hurt him, which he will tell you about these horrible monsters that had no head. Classic Britannia monster there, the headless. Once you reach the bridge, if there is a detect spell, you can cast it, and the moonstones radiate pure lunar energy. When you reach the runestones, a flash of lunar magic will occur, and 2 headless will appear and attack the player. If after this combat the player casts a detect spell, the lunar portal, or what remains of it, will radiate corrupted, chaotic lunar energy. Of course, at that point, the player enters into the cave, which is in fact a dungeon, which has a cavernous entrance, a portal, stone archway, stairs going down, a central room with a seal, and then finally the ritual room. And the progression on this is once you enter the entrance, you will get into a skeleton battle. After the skeleton battle, you will be able to pick up a glowing skull. Also in the cave entrance, you will pick up an Ankh that still has energy. Upon entering the central room, you will find a seal and a door that is sealed also by magic. The sigil must be activated by either casting life, death, and moon magic on the pedestals, or by placing the Ankh, skull, and moon shard on the pedestals. Upon activating the sigil, you get another headless ambush. Dealing with that enables you to enter the ritual room where the children are being held in cages. The lunar wraith attacks you. Upon defeating the lunar wraith, you can free the children and return to town the virtuous hero, or the slightly jerkish hero, depending on which option you went with. And that is the lightning fast overview of the story.